Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is the 2022 Junior Nationals Bodybuilding overall champ. Today's guest is Nick Langer. Nick, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, for sure, Nick. So we got a lot to talk about, man. You're fresh off of a couple overalls. I saw that before Junior Nationals, you won another overall, I'm assuming, to qualify. So we'll get into all of that. But first of all, I kind of want to ask you a couple of questions I ask all of my guests just to kind of get the conversational ball rolling, so to speak. The first question, Nick, is who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
So my favorite, honestly, I've got two that I kind of really watched and kind of emulated as I kind of came up. And that was Dorian and then Branch. And the reason being is Dorian and Branch both have a work ethic that's unlike anybody else, I think, in bodybuilding. And I don't think anybody can argue that when you watch them train. And, I think one other might be Tom Platz, which is also the reason why my legs are the way that they are. Cause I used to watch him when I was younger, and watching him, train and destroy himself on legs. I was always one of those ones where I was like, I want to chase that too. Right. So, and I think the reason why I really liked Dorian was I respected the aspect that he didn't care about anybody else. It was literally just go in, do the work, completely seclude himself, which is the exact opposite of what our entire world is now. And that mentality is something that I love and agree with when it comes down to bodybuilding, because that's like the purity of bodybuilding that I feel like has kind of gone by the wayside thanks to social media. I understand as a business owner and as a trainer that you have to use it. But at the same time, if I could, go and hide in the shadows just much like he did and do it that way, I would all day long. So. Very
cool. Now I want to ask you, who are some of the physiques or some of the current IFBB pros on the circuit that, you respect their mentality, their physique, kind of look up to them as an NPC athlete? Are there any guys currently that you kind of look up to, or not per se?
I like a lot of the top guys. I think there's a lot of good mentalities that are coming from a lot of those guys. Brett Wilkin and I have talked a few times. I like him. Hunter, I like him. They all got kind of a really good mentality and a good work ethic, and what they've achieved is pretty crazy to see just in short time frames that they've done it. So, I really appreciate that. And it was actually funny. I actually talked with Hunter at Junior Nats, and he came up to me and was like, hey man, I appreciate you doing what bodybuilders should do, which is coming to a junior level show and winning a junior level show before trying to go to a pro level show, pro qualifier show. That was the tradition previously, is do a junior level show to really make sure that you can go to that national level to actually be competitive with the other guys. Unfortunately, it seems like that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. Again, I'm much more of a purist bodybuilder at heart. I would much rather kind of climb the ranks and take my time to create a look that I'm actually going to be rewarded for in the end, and really take that time to pay my dues to get to that point. So
very cool. Love that, man. All right. So tell us, Nick, at what age did you start lifting weights, and why did you start lifting weights at that age? And just kind of keep it brief with that. We don't go right into like the whole bodybuilding story quite yet. We just kind of want to touch on the weightlifting, because we will get into all things bodybuilding here in a few minutes. So what age and why did you start lifting weights at that age?
Yeah, so I actually started about 12, 13. I started lifting weights because I was an athlete. I wanted to be a football player at that point in time. So I was an all around athlete, doing football, baseball, and wrestling. So I started lifting weights actually because my older brother was lifting weights, and we did it in a garage at one of our friends' houses. And I was probably too young to be squatting and doing stuff like that, but we were doing it at that young age. And more so than anything, my lifting experience was more so aimed towards athletics to start. It wasn't actually aimed at bodybuilding in the beginning.
Very cool. All right. So talk a little bit, Nick, if you don't mind, share with us kind of a little bit about your upbringing, your childhood. So Where did you grow up? You mentioned sports. What sports did you play? What were those younger years like for you up to about high school? And then we'll stop there around the high school age, and then we'll transition.
Yeah. So I born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, except for about a year. I lived between Houston, Texas, and here. Growing up, I had a great supportive family, great parents who are still married today. So I had a good example of what a good marriage looks like and what a good family looks like. And tons of support. And one of the main things is if I committed to something, then I needed to commit full force. And it didn't really matter. The thing that I would say is I've never been massively, how do I want to say this? Gifted when it comes to like sports and athletics. I've had to work for it. And I've had to really grind to make it happen. And, I think that there is some nuance that is really nice about that, because it makes it so you understand what work ethic has to be in order to be able to outperform others that may have been a little bit more gifted than you at a younger age. So, I in grade school, high school, I was a football player, a baseball player, and a wrestler. I did that pretty much all through grade school, high school, and then I ended up going on to play collegiate football at just an NAIA, so a small like D3 style school. Actually, that was the transition. In part of that was a transition where I had to transition over to bodybuilding because of what happened in football. So that was kind of the transition. But yeah, and I again, the training aspects of things like that were all aimed towards athletics more than they were towards bodybuilding, pretty much through all of high school for the most part. But there was a exposure that I got. I had a weightlifting coach in high school that was a bodybuilder at that time. And I saw his physique and I saw him training, and I was like, hey man, can you give me something? Like, I'm in my off season for football. I see what you're doing. Like, just give me a program. And this program that he gave me was pretty nuts. It was a pretty good bodybuilding style hypertrophy program. And that's when I started to kind of fall in love with the training style of bodybuilding. And I will say that was also around the same time that I stumbled upon John Meadows, who I would say is actually one of the biggest influences on me as far as bodybuilding goes. He was a friend of mine, but also was also the main guy that I a lot of my programming, a lot of the ideas that I had came from him specifically. So
very cool. Now, talk to me a little bit more about your parents. Now you're from Omaha, Nebraska. So before we hit record, we kind of chatted a minute. We're about 2 hours apart. I'm in Iowa. You're obviously in Nebraska, but we're only 2 hours apart. So growing up in the Midwest, I've had a few other Midwest, athletes on here and stuff. And, it's a little bit different culture. It's a different mentality, especially if you've traveled and lived in bigger cities. Obviously Omaha is a big city. It's still the Midwest though. Tying all of this together, your parents, like, what was your relationship with them like? Like, what did they instill in you? And then, do you feel like growing up in the Midwest, as you've had opportunities to live in other places and travel, do you feel like growing up in the Midwest kind of like really played into that work ethic that you kind of had to acquire because maybe you weren't the most talented athlete? Does that kind of make sense? And what do you think about that? Your parents growing up in the Midwest, tie all that together if you don't mind, Nick.
Yeah. So, I think the Midwest mentality is one that is that, when somebody's from the Midwest, I was brought up, hard work. The minute that I was able to drive, I was buying everything that I possibly could, and I had to work for it. It was an aspect of understanding that nothing was given to me and everything had to be worked for. And that didn't matter what it was, as far as athletics or academics or whatever it might've been. I needed to make sure that I was working hard and that I gave my 100% effort. And I think the other mentality that comes from being in the Midwest is respect. We are very respectful to anybody and everybody, unless you cross our paths in the wrong way. But my parents always instilled in me the aspect of, giving respect to every single person that crosses your path, and allowing yourself to understand who people are, and not judging people straight off the bat, and having that just open mindset that, everybody and anybody that's around you, you've got to love on them just like they love on you. Right. So, and I think the other aspect of that is that I was brought up as a man of faith. And so that is, a big Midwest thing as well. And, that's kind of stuck with me as far as my own decisions that I make on a daily basis, as far as, my morality and things that I do. So, yeah, I think, tying all that together. And then I think the other thing that I would say, being in the Midwest, and you can only explain this to people that live in the Midwest, is our lives move much slower than big cities. It's just a very weird thing to say, but it's, we look at it as like for me, I run multiple businesses and I have so on and so forth. And I've got kids and I got family, and everybody would look at my life and be like, man, that's like crazy. Right. But I look at it and I'm like, when I lived in the big city, like Houston, it was nonstop. Right. And so it's a different feeling, being in the Midwest. Yeah. Omaha's got 1 million people or whatever it's got, which is quote unquote a big city, but life just doesn't move as fast as other places. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah. And you're talking to a guy that's in a town of less than 5,000 people. So, going to Omaha is like the big city for us and everything. But, like I've lived in Denver and Detroit and some other big cities. And you're right, man. It's just a different culture. It's a different vibe. Everything is just, it's different, but it's kind of cool being from the Midwest. It's definitely some awesome values that most of us are instilled with and taught growing up. So now I do want to ask you, before we transition, the bodybuilding culture as a whole in Omaha. I mean, I know there are some pretty legit gyms in the Omaha area, but what is the bodybuilding culture like in the Omaha, Nebraska area? Is there a rich history? Is it kind of catching fire? Like where is it at right now? Where has it been in the past? Because I'm not really familiar with it.
Yeah, so the bodybuilding kind of community in Omaha is actually, I would say, now on the rise. Some of that is also due to the fact that, personal plug here, we have 3 gyms that I co-own. Iron Heaven Gym, which is more aimed towards powerlifting, bodybuilding, and having all of those machines and the utility bars and all the specialized equipment to actually allow somebody to achieve a goal. And also the community, right? And so I think one of the big things that you'll see, and you see it, in Denver, you see it in Texas, you see it in California, all of these places that have like hubs of bodybuilding, is because of the fact that the culture that's created in those specific areas, and actually showing people that it's possible, right? But as far as like the pros here, it's funny. I'm actually in the midst of putting up a couple of pictures of the pros that we have, and sitting there looking at them like, we've got about 5 or 6 or 7 IFBB pros, but pretty much all females. We've got a couple males. We had one that lived here forever, Sean Harley. He was a men's physique and then classic physique pro, and he'd been on thousands of like different magazine covers and stuff like that. But outside of that, we've got a couple other IFBB pros that are here locally. But it's not a massive scene at this point in time, but it is growing. And, it's fun to watch the interest of individuals, especially the younger kids coming up. A lot of them are trending more towards the classic physique and the men's physique look, because it's a more attainable look. But I would say in general, as far as the culture goes, it is growing for sure here in Nebraska.
Cool. Now, Omaha is that area is pretty big with powerlifting though, isn't it? And has been for quite a few years, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So Omaha actually has a big history when it comes to powerlifting. So at one point in time, Big Iron Gym was one of the big gyms in the nation. It was actually like the most competitive gym with Westside. And so, that was ran by Rick Hussey. Rick Hussey had passed away. I actually trained at Big Iron when I was about 17, 18 doing powerlifting. And yeah, he had a culture that was created with just monsters. I mean, you'd walk in there's guys squatting 800-900 pounds and just insane things to watch. So he was literally the only gym that competed with Westside Barbell. So yeah, there's definitely a richer history of powerlifting in this area. But ever since Rick has passed, there's a few powerlifting gyms that we have in the area, but nothing has really gotten to that level that Rick was at previously. And like I said, I think now we're starting to see, especially as social media continues to grow the sport of bodybuilding, we're seeing a lot of the younger generation starting to come up and want to start to participate in it. And I'm seeing a lot of that in our gym because our culture really is created around the idea of chasing, that level of greatness and chasing, something that other people would view as not possible. So.
Excellent, man. All right. So we're up to about high school. We talked about sports and stuff. Now, what were you kind of thinking once you were kind of at that mindset of, okay, I'm going to be graduating here in a year or two, or, in a semester, depending upon your mindset. But when you started thinking about post high school, I know you mentioned you went and played some college football, but career wise or job wise, what was kind of on your mind in high school? And then once you graduated high school, you went off to college. Did you kind of move in that direction, or how did life unfold post high school in terms of your studies and what you went to college for?
Yeah. So I, coming out of high school, I really honestly wanted to go into being a doctor. So, I had it set pretty much in my head that I was going to go to school to become a doctor. And so I went straight into college and was pre-med, biology major, and you kind of ran with that as I was in college, and ended up finishing my BS in biology pre-med, but decided that I did not want to spend 4 to 5 more years in, trying to actually become a doctor. So, and I also realized as I was coming up that becoming a doctor was going to feed more into the pharmaceutical side of things rather than actually fixing people hands-on and utilizing what I believe in, which is nutrition and movement and, overall health, without having to take a pharmaceutical medication to get the result. Right. So, it really kind of changed my views on what I wanted to do, just because I didn't fully believe in the healthcare system, if you want to call it that, that we have at this point in time. So.
Okay. So, talk a little bit about your college experience. I think you mentioned something about maybe there was an injury or something with football, or football didn't go maybe as planned once you got there. So talk about your overall college experience. And then I know you mentioned earlier, Nick, that whatever happened with football, that kind of tied into you starting to move more towards bodybuilding. So let's kind of like finish up the college talk. What was that experience like? If there was an injury, what was it? And then how were you really exposed to bodybuilding? Just kind of talk about that transition into, hey, I'm going to do this bodybuilding thing.
Yeah. So football was kind of my passion. That was the one thing that I loved. I think anybody that has played sports, you kind of find out which one you love, and then you kind of dedicate yourself to that, and that becomes part of your identity. And that was really what happened to me going into college, is I identified myself as a college athlete playing football. And so rewind a little bit, my junior year of high school, I ended up having a brain bleed playing football. So I had a subdural hematoma. And so I ended up having to that was my senior year. Sorry, brain's not right now. Senior year of high school, I had that. And so I had to take the year off. I was actually invited at that point in time to go play in one of the all-star bowls or whatever, and ended up having to take that off just because of the brain bleed. And was told by the doctor that there was no chance that it was going to happen again. And, I was just as high of an injury case as anybody else if it were to happen. So they gave me the go ahead to go back and start playing college football the next year. And so I went in, played college ball. My freshman year of college, I ended up going to a small NAIA school out in Crete, Nebraska, and played there. And it was, I believe, the 6th game in. After the 6th game in, I was in a practice, and our biggest lineman, this 300 plus pound dude, ends up taking me down, and all of his weight goes right into my shoulder. Completely separated the shoulder. They actually thought I had broken my collarbone because it was so swollen, and ended up having to get surgery on that, and ended up transferring out of that school, coming back to Omaha and going to UNO for a year. And then ended up going to another college. I had a coach reach out to me about playing ball for them. And I wasn't done yet. I was like, I told myself, I'm not going to stop until I'm literally told I can't play anymore. That, again, that mentality that I kind of grew up with. And so I went and played at another NAIA school. And then on the 7th game in, ended up having another brain bleed. And so at that point in time, the doctors were like, listen, from here on out, you are now, it's like they said, like a 70 to 80% chance if I get hit in the head the right place, that I would pretty much die. So they're like, no more contact sports the rest of your life. And that was really the one thing that was like, okay, well, what can I compete in? What can I, drive towards? And that's when I switched back over to bodybuilding and kind of made that transition. So, it was it took a traumatic injury to be able to actually switch over and actually make that transition for me. And I think at that point in time, that's the hardest thing, is that kind of identity shift, because, you've identified as this athlete your entire life, and now it's been taken away from you. So what are you? What can you do? What is your quote unquote purpose at that point in time? And so I had to do a little bit of soul searching and figure it out, and realized that, bodybuilding was something that I enjoyed doing. But then I also realized that what I was learning from bodybuilding, the discipline I was learning, and also the ideas of nutrition and training and all of that would also allow me to impact others. So it allowed me to kind of start to go in the direction that I wanted to go to from a life standpoint too. So
now let's talk about your first competition. Why don't you just talk us up to when you actually decided to compete? Because it's one thing to train like a bodybuilder. It's a whole other thing to actually, be an athlete, step on stage in your posing trunks and do the bodybuilding thing, right? So why don't you talk about the process leading up? What was kind of like the impetus, or where was it like, okay, I'm actually going to step on a stage. I'm actually going to compete for the first time. Why don't you just walk us through that entire process? How did that first show go? Did you enjoy it? Did you have to kind of warm up to stepping back on stage? And then why don't you just from there, just take us through kind of your competition history up to, going into 2022, because we'll get into kind of what's happened up to this point. So maybe just stop at 2021 if you don't mind.
Sure. So funny is actually my first competition I did back in 2010. So I did that. I was actually at that point in time was working at a big box gym as a personal trainer that was the first year I started personal training. And I had basically the main salesman guy for the entire big box gym was a bodybuilder. And at that point in time, I was 20, I was powerlifting. And I was this massive dude at like 255, 260, and, not a pretty 255, 260, but I was. And he looked at me and he's like, man, for 20 years old, you got a frame on you, man. Would you ever think about bodybuilding? And I'm like, I've thought about it. I've seen, at that point in time, again, I had been watching John Meadows. I had been watching Branch Warren. I had known of Dorian Yates and watched all the videos and, watched Pumping Iron and loved the idea behind it. And I was like, you know what, let's do it. And so at that point in time, I was a personal trainer. I was also doing manual labor outside, building boat docks and boat lifts, and I was in school. And so what ended up happening was we did a 16-week prep. I went from about 255, 260 down to 176 pounds in 16 weeks. I completely murdered myself on that prep. I remember doing like an hour of interval cardio, going 1 minute fast, 1 minute slow for an hour on stairs, on top of all sorts of other stuff in order to get my body to actually do that. And like I said, working outside, on top of that as well in the Midwest summers, which is, horrible. So we ended up getting down all the way down to 176. And I actually ended up having to like sit in my coach's bathroom with the shower on hot to actually even make weight. And then we ended up making weight at 176. And then I ended up winning the middleweight class at that show. And then I actually lost the overall to a guy that went on to place, I think, second or third at junior nationals as a light heavyweight. So, but that was my first experience with bodybuilding. So a very extreme experience, losing 85, 90 pounds or whatever, but seems to be kind of a normal theme for especially bodybuilders when they come into this in the first place. And the coach that I had at that point in time, you know, he did what he could. I look back on what he did and I'm like, man, that was ridiculous. You should have never have done that to me. But you know, I again, it was one of those aspects of, at that point in time, I was 20 years old. I was following direction, and you know, this guy had been there. So obviously I wanted to make sure that I could follow what he told me to do, and executed that to a T. So that was the first show in 2010. And then I took years off just to play ball. So I went back to and played football. And then in 2014, started competing again. In 2014 is when I actually met Matt Porter, rest in peace. And I worked with Matt Porter for about 3 years. Him and I did junior nationals together. I think that was 2014, 2015, something like that, as a light heavyweight. So I was 198 pounds at junior nats. And at that point in time, ended up placing, like, I don't know, middle of the pack. But that was when junior nationals, I think at that point in time, there were 28 bodybuilders in the light heavyweight class, something like that. So it was a massive show. That was back when it was in Chicago. And yeah, so did that as my first national level show. After I had won an open show regional show in Nebraska. And so ended up doing junior nationals. And then let's see here. Then ended up taking basically 3 more years off after kind of competing for a little while there, and ended up doing North Americans after doing I did a local show, won the overall, and then did North Americans. At that point in time, I was actually working with Dom Mustachio. So Dom Super Slice is what everybody knows him as. So I worked with him for that year. He's actually a great friend of mine. And funny enough, I actually met him in 2014 when I did junior nationals, because he was working with Matt Porter at the same time. And so him and I became friends at that point in time. And then when 2018, 2019, whatever that was, when I did North Americans during COVID, which was super fun. That was, again, I ended up placing, I think 12th out of 24 or something like that. So middle of the pack. And really the biggest thing is that I've always had a dominant lower body and never had the upper body to match. And so from an aesthetic standpoint, that was one of the biggest issues. So yeah. And then again, took another 2-3 years off now. And that's kind of where we're back to now. And ended up doing, let's see here. So did the Adela Garcia in Texas, ended up winning the overall there, and then just did junior nationals, ended up winning the overall there. So yeah. Cool.
All right. So we're going to get into those 2 competitions. You won the overall this year here in a minute, but I want to take a step back. There's a couple things I want to pull out of you or just discuss further, Nick, that you kind of brought up during your competing. Now, you've taken some extended periods off from the time that you first competed in 2010 up to this year. Now, were all of those extended breaks specifically bodybuilding, like related or focused in terms of just growing, or was some of that just life related in there?
Yeah, majority of the time actually was life related. So, you know, I knew that I needed to take time off to actually put the tissue on. But within that time frame, I got married. We've got 2 boys. So, you know, we had 2 babies. The prep that I did actually with, and I forgot an entire time that I did another prep. But one of the preps that I did with Ed Koo, who used to be actually the owner of Iron Rebel and whatnot. We did a prep together. That was actually when our first son was born. So we had a newborn at that point in time. So and then I took basically 2 years off after that point in time, just to be with family. And also a lot of the time off has also been for business and growing businesses and all of that. So, you know, I still structured and lived the life of a bodybuilder during those times. and really focused on building muscle tissue and kind of improving. But a lot of that time was spent, between family and business and kind of improving other aspects of life rather than just bodybuilding. So.
Okay. So that's perfect, because I want you to kind of like explain to us and just share with us from your experience, from your bodybuilding story, what you just said, because I see from my perspective, a lot of people, especially like people in your position, right? They're moving up the ranks in the NPC. Their, focus is, eventually someday to be an IFBB pro, and the whole bodybuilding thing that we see through social media, right? I see so many people, I think that's they have their blinders on, which is great. And you need that for bodybuilding. I get that. I'm a bodybuilder myself, but you have to have some sort of, I'm not going to say balance, but you have to have some realization that bodybuilding, just like football, just like any other athletic endeavor, it's not forever. Yes, we can train forever. And if you want to be the 75-year-old that's still on stage, you can, but realistically competing at a top level in the NPC or IFBB, that's a short time span. So what I want you to share with us is, the importance from your perspective of taking some time off to start a family, to get married, to start businesses, to invest in life outside of bodybuilding. Because I love bodybuilding. You love bodybuilding. Probably everybody that's watching, listening to this loves bodybuilding. We're passionate about it, but bodybuilding literally isn't everything. And I see a lot of people that maybe reach even an elite status within the IFBB that are professional bodybuilders, all this stuff. And then after their time is up, like you see it on social media, they're having that identity crisis. It happens right before our eyes because of social media. And they're a mess, and it's really sad to see. So talk about the importance, Nick, from your perspective of investing in other aspects of life besides just bodybuilding. And when you do that, that makes you a better individual. And for you, you're a perfect example. You're competing at a very high elite level. So talk about that if you don't mind, please.
Yeah. So I think, the biggest thing that I would say is probably one of the biggest issues that I see with most people is that they have solely identified themselves as a bodybuilder. And I don't identify myself as a bodybuilder. It's funny because you'll ask a lot of my friends, I stay covered up most of the time. I try not to like show off what I look like. And a lot of that is because of the fact that I do bodybuilding for myself. It's very much more of a selfish endeavor than it is anything else. And it's not, it's not who I am necessarily, but it's what I love. It's a passion I have. Right. And so I think that's one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have. And the reason why a lot of people end up getting to this area where they, lose themselves is because they identify themselves as a bodybuilder. And that's not how I identify myself. So I think that's one thing, just the actual mind shift aspect of things. Outside of that, I also realize long-term vision wise, much like you said, I've got I'm 33. So I just turned 33. I've got maybe 4 years left of actual good bodybuilding left in me. And realistically, probably only about 2 or 3 before I'm good. And with that being said, it's an aspect of understanding like there is life after bodybuilding. And the only way that I can actually make sure that, that I have the future that I need and I have the people that I love around me is by making sure that they stay priorities in my life. And so, really making sure that, yes, bodybuilding, you have to have tunnel vision, and specifically tunnel vision during those preps. And it's a conversation that I have with my wife of, hey, listen, for the next 16 weeks, it's locked in. This is what's going to happen. This is where we're going. And that way it's an understanding of that. Right. But at the end of the day, outside of that time frame, my entire purpose and my entire goal is to actually focus in on improving business, improving family, and changing those things, as you can hear my son back there, and making sure, those are priorities during those times. And having that understanding of like, yes, it is a snapshot time where it's complete focus on bodybuilding, but still having that understanding that the long-term goal is my family. The long-term goal is success outside of bodybuilding and creating a life that is more than just bodybuilding, because bodybuilding is temporary. You know, I'm going to use every single damn day that I can in this little window of time to make sure that I can be my absolute best. But at the same time, I also understand it has a life. And I think part of that is, you know, the transition that I made from football was the same thing. Is once I finally understood that and kind of had that experience, I was like, okay, this isn't who I am. It's what I love, but it isn't who I am. And again, I think that's the big kind of mindset shift that a lot of people have to make, and understand, even getting into bodybuilding, that it's not your identity. It's not who you are. And, you know, if you can keep that mindset, then it makes it a lot easier to balance your life, because you're balancing now what actually matters, which is family, which is faith, which is business, and creating a life that is going to last you outside of the 10 to 15 years that you're going to bodybuild.
Excellent. Great perspective. I appreciate that, Nick. Now, before we get back into actually competing and all that bodybuilding stuff, let's talk about, since we're already there, let's talk about business. So you said you have 3 gyms. I know that you do coaching. I saw that from your Instagram. You have kind of your own coaching team or services. So talk about when you kind of, started to use bodybuilding or transition into the fitness bodybuilding industry world, in terms of not just competing, not just being an athlete, but actual business, and just talk about the evolution, please.
Yeah. So, like I had stated, I started like personal training coaching back in 2010, and was doing that basically through my entire college career. Was doing that part-time, and then realized that it was something that I wanted to kind of dive deep into. And so ended up working out of a small fitness studio for a little while, and was in the supplement industry, working for a local company, Complete Nutrition, at that point in time, and really kind of got into the industry as far as both supplementation and also training. And then ended up going independent as a trainer, because I had enough people that were coming to me, and was renting out just a local gym spot here in town, and was still in the supplement industry and doing that as well. At that point in time, I had been with a franchise, GNC, for about a year. And then I transitioned over to a local company, Rexius Nutrition, and worked with them for a while, and was with their like franchise operations and brand development and product development. And at that point in time was still coaching, and was coaching pretty much full time. And then the owner of Rexius Nutrition and we actually took a trip out to California, and trained in a gym that was at a competitor's kind of warehouse. And him and I looked at each other and were like, we've got to do this. And at that point in time, my coaching business was at a good point where I could actually step down from my position at Rexius Nutrition and just run my coaching business and also run the gym. So we opened up the first gym. And it was interesting to see, because, we opened up this gym, and him and I look at each other and we're like, okay, listen, we just want a cool place to train that has everything we want in it. And we're just hoping that we get to 225 members to cover our bills, and boom, we'll be good. And we hit that pretty quick, and it was like, okay, I guess everybody else likes what we do. And then it just kind of started to compound on itself. So that was back in 2017 is when we opened our first location, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And then we had demand for one across the city, so we ended up opening that one. And then as soon as we opened that one, the original one grew even faster, and the new one grew, and then expanded the original location and continued to grow. And then we had a demand for one in Gretna, which is another kind of sub city outside of Omaha. Opened that one, and that one's just continued to grow as well. And as soon as we opened that one, the original location grew even more, so we expanded the original location. So it just kind of has been kind of spinning downhill ever since then. And on top of that, in 2020, I had gotten to a point where I could no longer take more people on my roster. I just figured out that I was like, I'm working way too much. I've got way too many clients. I'm making great money, but it was an aspect of I wasn't giving the service that I would want to be giving to people. And that's when I ended up bringing on coaches, because I was like, you know what, I want to make sure that I can impact everybody. I want to make sure that my ideals can get brought across to anybody that comes to us. And so ended up at this point in time now I have 7 coaches that work underneath of me as well, and running BR Physiques, which is the training company that I have. And so basically anybody that comes in, they work with one of my coaches, but then I oversee everything that's going on with those coaches. And yeah, so, and I still have my own, obviously, roster of athletes that I work with as well, or just general health clients, but oversee a team of 7 coaches as well. And as we continue to kind of expand the gyms and grow the gyms, I'm sure that will expand itself. So, so it's been kind of a crazy evolution, you know, going from just a basic trainer at a big box gym to where we're at now. But it's something that I would never give up. You know, again, and I think it's one of those aspects of like bodybuilding has taught me discipline, and that's what's been brought into business. And so a lot of the discipline aspects that I've learned from bodybuilding and just continually progressing that mental aspect of discipline has really helped out from a business standpoint as well.
Now, have you seen, as you yourself kind of lead BR Physiques, and then, you know, you're overseeing these gyms, do you feel like you being an example, you know, by competing and, you know, people being able to see you on stage and being shredded and winning shows, do you feel like that gives some of this business growth some fuel to the fire? Or do you feel like the gym and the BR Physiques would just grow even if you weren't necessarily competing and out front being that leader and that example? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So what I would say is I don't think I would necessarily need to compete and or get shredded in order to lead by example. And so the only reason why I say that is you can see a ton of people that are on social media right now that don't even compete, that have massive businesses, massive followings when it comes to health and fitness. And so it's an aspect that I look at of, I believe, and I'm a firm believer in this. And I think, you know, you look at somebody like John Meadows when he was around, he had stopped competing, but his following grew faster after he was done competing. And a lot of that was because he was putting knowledge out. And so I'm much more of the mindset of, if I can continue to improve and pass along knowledge, then the business will continue to grow because of the fact that I'm helping others. And so that's the way that I look at it. Whether I'm competing or not, I'll always live a lifestyle that's a healthy lifestyle because it's what I believe. But that doesn't mean that I have to be sub 5% body fat all the time in order to make that happen, nor should I. And, you know, so I think the other aspect that I look at is from a culture standpoint, you know, majority of people don't want to look like me. Majority of people don't want to be a 225, 230 pound bodybuilder that's shredded. You know, they look at that as something that's unrealistic, and that probably takes a ton of drugs to get there. And, you know, you're probably putting your health at risk and blah, 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 whatever. And so it's an aspect of understanding, like, I know the demographics that are out there at this point in time. The bodybuilding demographic is a very small percentage of individuals. And so from a business standpoint, I don't think that, you know, being a massive bodybuilder is all that beneficial when it comes to the actual percentage of clientele that are out there. But I believe living a proper lifestyle and practicing what you preach 100% has to be shown to everybody else. And when it comes to like the execution that I have from the standpoint of my habits and the things that I'm doing day in and day out and the work ethic that I have, that's what I think my team models after more than anything else, right? I don't expect people to be as crazy as I am when it comes to the training or when it comes to the nutrition, or, you know, I'm a very type A analytical individual. So, you know, I'm going to always end up having that quote unquote mentality. But, you know, like I said, I don't think that bodybuilding necessarily enhances everything as fast when it comes to business growth. I think it's simply about how much impact and help that I can give to other people that actually is growing the business even faster.
All right. Love it. Okay. Last business question. And then we're going to get back into all things bodybuilding to finish up our conversation. What do you feel like being a business owner has kind of taught you? Just like bodybuilding is kind of giving you discipline, you know, once you own your own business and it's your baby, it's your thing, man, like there's so many lessons and so much growth within that if you're open to it. So what do you feel like is the number one biggest thing as a business owner you've kind of learned up to this point?
Yeah. So I would say probably one of my biggest things at this point in time is patience and understanding. You know, it's one of those aspects, especially as like an entrepreneur, you want everything to grow super fast and you want everything to move in a direction. And like, especially as you start seeing success, you're like, okay, I should see more. There should be more. Right. Or like for me with the coaches that work underneath of me, it's understanding like, okay, I've learned these lessons over 12 years. I can't expect them to understand it in 6 months. And I need to continue to have that idea of patience and understanding with those individuals as we continue to get it grow the business. But then also patience with myself and understanding of like, listen, it's not always going to be a win. It's not, you know, and those failures are something that's actually beneficial and something that's actually going to, in the long haul, help me. And it might feel like it's painful right now, but understanding that, you know, it's okay. And it's part of business is sometimes you end up losing and you have to have the patience to understand that that's okay. And not to allow it to kind of drag you down and take you out of the mentality of continuing to move forward.
Excellent. I needed to hear that one myself. So thank you. Patience, man. That's definitely very valuable. Okay. So getting back into competing. Now I saw on one of your recent Instagram posts, I think after your overall win before junior nationals, you had given a shout out to your current coach. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I'll let you do that. But I want to ask you, you've worked with a lot of coaches. You know, you've mentioned several names, elite top level coaches. Why did you pick your current coach, Coach Derek? And maybe just talk about the importance of having a coach. Obviously, you're a coach yourself. You have a coach for bodybuilding. Why don't you just talk about, again, why you pick this coach and why it's important for a coach or an athlete to have a coach?
Yeah, so I picked Derek Dolgner because of the fact that I was actually working with a different high-level coach that I'm not going to name, but ended up having some pretty crazy and severe health issues that came up. I had like a heart arrhythmia that had happened, and blood pressure was through the roof, and, you know, just from pushing the limits way more than what we should have been doing. And so at that point in time, I actually decided, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to take my time. I dieted myself back down and pulled off the weight that I had put on and got my health back in line and pulled out everything that we were doing at that point in time. And took a step back and was like, okay, I'm going to think about this a little bit. I'm going to find somebody that I fully trust and that I can fully believe in. And Derek and I had a conversation. He was actually referred to me from one of my coaches and actually one of my good friends, Blake, who had worked with him. And he had said, you know, hey, listen, this guy, he's super intelligent. He knows what he's doing. And he cares about health. Sorry, hold on.
That's okay. It's dad life, man. It's all
Yep.
good.
You're good, buddy. And so he's like, you know, this guy is going to put your health first. And he's going to care about what's going on with your body, but at the same time, optimize everything. And speaking with Derek, him and I are very much on the same page as far as training modalities and recovery and utilization of kind of like the minimal effective dose when it comes to anything that we're using, and just making sure that we're always on the same page from a communication standpoint. And the other aspect is that his roster, he keeps it smaller because he does so much more in-depth work with his clients. So, you know, and him and I had a really good conversation about, you know, blood work and kind of my past and what we had been seeing and, you know, things that we needed to kind of adjust. And it's always been an open conversation of like, hey, this is what we're thinking. What are your thoughts? And, you know, again, the other aspect was is that he was kind of giving me out of the box ideas. He had also worked as an apprentice under John Meadows for a few years. He had worked under Eugene Teo as an apprentice. He actually had worked under Cassim as an apprentice. So he's got a lot of knowledge from very high elite level individuals that have really kind of helped him really narrow down mechanics and nutrition and kind of thinking outside of the box. Because if you know, like, Eugene is very much outside of the box, and even John was outside of the box with his nutritional ideas that he had. And so, you know, it was an aspect of, I wanted to really kind of dive in, and I knew that it would be a different perspective than a lot of the quote unquote bro coaching that I've done before. And it has, you know, like I told you before we started this, I'm eating like organ meats now, just for the, you know, the benefits of a lot of the vitamins and minerals that are in there. You know, we've got a lot of different food groups that I've never really ate before. You know, we've kept dairy in pretty much the entire time. You know, lots of like grass-fed cheese, grass-fed butters, you know, just a very different style of dieting and fruit beyond more than I've ever ate in my diet, going, you know, literally up until the day of the show. So, you know, it's an aspect of, again, it was just a very different approach. But what I can say is we've been tracking data the entire time, and my blood pressure's never been better. My blood work's never come back better. Like, everything looks amazing, and my body's functioning at a different level than it ever has. And so, you know, again, it was an aspect of, I think majority of people need to do themselves a favor and not do what I did when I was coming up in this, which is pick the big name that's kind of, you know, quote unquote pumping out results, because just because they're putting out results doesn't mean that they're actually doing it in a healthy way. And, you know, it doesn't mean that the mentality that they have as a coach is, you know, yeah, you want to win, but I also don't want to die in 5 years because of what I did to win. Right. I mean, you're seeing guys in their 30s having, you know, kidney failure and, you know, all sorts of issues that shouldn't even be happening because they decided they wanted to push the limits and not pay attention to their body. Right. So that would be my idea of, it's important to have a coach that actually fully understands what they're doing from all aspects. But then on top of that, also making sure that, you know, you're taking responsibility for your own health, doing what's necessary when it comes to blood work, doing what's necessary when it comes to tracking what's going on with your blood pressure and everything from those sides, and the health markers in the process, in order to make sure that your health is staying as optimal as possible when you're pushing the limits. Because bodybuilding is about pushing the limits. You're going to see that happen, but there's an acceptable range to push, and there's an unacceptable range that's going to lead to catastrophic events down the road.
Very well put. All right. So we're gonna wrap up kind of with where you're at currently. You're in prep. So thank you for man, you're putting everything together. Sometimes I bring guys on in prep, and it's like, man, it's hard to get any words out of them, or it's hard to understand even what they're saying. But so thank you for doing this, Nick. But so talk about going in from finishing up 2021, going into 2022. What was your mindset? What was your focus? What were your goals? And then talk about the 2 overalls that you've already got underneath your belt so far this year.
Yeah. So 2021 coming into 2022 was the mentality of, okay, I'm going to bring my absolute best this year. We started dieting back in December. So we started pulling back down in December. I think the highest I got was about 265 this last off season, maybe a little bit more. I don't remember. But we slowly pulled me down, maintaining muscle tissue as we kind of came down. And really, again, the idea for me was more of an aspect of, it's funny because I actually was originally going to do North Americans, because my mindset was I wanted redemption. I didn't like placing middle of the pack, and I wanted to come back and actually place in a higher position. But as we went through the prep, my body just responded, and it kicked, and it continues to kick. And a lot of that, again, is I think because of the approach that we've taken in the manner of managing stress and managing a lot of the external factors in order to keep health in line. And so my body's just kind of clicking along as we go without having to push extremes. which is also the reason why my brain is working pretty well at this point in time, because, we came out of that last show and kind of working on a little bit of a rebound and just kind of daily manipulations, depending upon how my body's been responding. But I'll get back into that here in a second. So we went into, we were originally going to do a show that's coming up next weekend, which is TCO in Minnesota. That was going to be our first show to qualify. And then we were going to end up doing USA's. But what ended up happening was my body kicked up super fast. And so we jumped into the Adela Garcia just because my body was already way ahead of schedule, and did the Adela Garcia in Texas. And we obviously went there, won that overall there, and then hopped into junior nationals after that. And really the reason why we did junior nationals was because I wanted to do that show for two reasons. Number one, I'm a purist at heart, so I wanted to do a junior level show and prove that I could actually stand up there with the best. And then number two, in my mind, I wanted the overall to show that I could actually come into USA's and they would know who I was coming into USA's. And so I wanted that exposure, and I wanted to be in front of Tyler Mannion, and I wanted to be in front of Sandy, and I wanted to be in front of the main judges that are going to be at USA's, just so that I already knew that they knew who I was when I came to USA's. And then basically ever since junior nationals, the goal has been, okay, their critiques for me were bigger chest, a little bit more mid back, and then a little bit more conditioning on the backside. And so with that being in mind, our goal then has been specifically to improve those areas, to feed me up, but keep me within range of that 225 weight class. And so we weighed in for junior nationals about 220, 221. Right now I'm holding steady about 225 to 227, and my body weight's just kind of holding there. We've had days where all of a sudden I'll have like a 5-pound drop out of nowhere, just from my metabolic rate kicking up, but holding pretty steady right around that 225, 226 range, and just trying to solidify a little bit more muscle tissue in those correct areas. And then once we get to probably about a 2.5 week out span, that's when we'll start to drop the hammer again to pull it back all the way in, and really just bring that final look of a little bit more condition than what we were at junior nationals, but keeping that fullness and trying to have a little bit more in my chest and a little bit more detail through my back. So that's kind of the goal. That was literally the only judge's feedback that I had gotten, that from all judges is the exact same feedback. So that's been the kind of the goal, and the mindset now is we're back to pushing pretty dang heavy training again. We've kept the volume a little bit lower just so that I can still recover, because my food's not crazy high. I think we're on somewhere around 2,800 calories or 3,000 calories. But that's manipulating day to day, depending upon what I'm waking up like and what I look like. So we've got about 2 more weeks left of really just kind of pushing the envelope to try to get whatever tissue we can in the next 2 weeks. And then, we've got a week of kind of pulling me back down, and then a week for peak week, and then it's showtime. So
what, I want you to be honest. Okay. Don't be like politically correct and all that stuff. All right. Don't be the nice guy. What do you want to accomplish at USA's this year? Because I definitely know I can't wait. Like, I'm more excited about USA's this year than any of the pro shows up to this point, because I've had a lot of the top guys on that are going to be the supers and the heavies. And it's going to be a battle. And I said this on the podcast here in the last couple of weeks, like, whoever comes out on top and gets pro cards at the USA's, like, they absolutely 1000% deserve it. And they've got some pro level physiques. So with that being said, what is your goal, Nick? What do you want to accomplish at USA's this year?
So my obvious goal, and the reason why we're doing this, is to win it, right? Like, I want to win the heavyweight class. Like, that's the only goal. And I understand that the only way that I'm going to do that, because I understand that some of the heavyweights that I'm going to go up against are, going to be more genetically blessed from a shape standpoint, is I have to come in gnarly conditioned. And that's the plan. So, the game plan will be to bring in a even more conditioned look than junior nationals. And I was pretty damn conditioned for junior nats. But bring it in even more conditioned, but with the fullness in the areas that the judges had wanted. And then let the cards fall where they're going to fall. At the end of the day, a top 3 finish would be amazing, but I don't want top 3. I want to win. Right. So, every single day, everything that I'm doing is the mentality is to go there to win. But, if I can go from North Americans placing 14th to placing 3rd at USA's, and probably one of the most competitive USA's I've seen in years, I'll be more than happy with something like that. Now, the only thing that obviously is going to play in my mind is, okay, can I stretch it out to get to North Americans if that's the case? And we'll see. But again, there is no plan B. My only plan is to come in at my absolute best in an improved look from junior nationals. And if I come in and I bring in what they wanted me to bring in, and that doesn't win that class, then there's nothing that I can do at that point in time. But I can promise that I'll bring in a better look than what I did from junior nationals. And that's all that matters to me.
Very cool. What's you mentioned earlier that you've got 2, 3, 4 years kind of good bodybuilding left in you. What's your ultimate bodybuilding goal? Like, let's say 5 years down the road, you're like, you know what, I'm done competing. We're just focusing fully on business, family, all those things. What would really make you satisfied as a competitor, as an athlete, in terms of you accomplishing what as a bodybuilder?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me would be I love the 212 class. I'm tall for the 212 class, and I understand that, but I would personally love to be able to just go and actually compete as a 212 pro. And to be 100% honest, just because of the fact that I understand what I'd be going up against from a structure standpoint, I'd be happy with getting like a top 3 finish as a 212 pro. I'm going to be realistic in the aspect of understanding, like, I'm not willing. I'm 5'8", so I'm tall for 212. But I'm not willing also to put my health at risk to be an open guy. So it's an aspect of that's more of where I would trend towards. And so with that being realistic, then yeah, a 212 coming in and actually competing as a 212er and at least, like, it would be a end all be all, but at least placing top 3 as a 212 pro. And, getting within that arms race of seeing if I could get to one of those bigger stages would be amazing to me. I mean, realistically, you got to think I'm 33. I'm technically I'm getting close to the end of where guys peak out when it comes to bodybuilding. So, like I said, I think both from a family standpoint and also from a bodybuilding standpoint, I've probably got about 2 to 3 years of actual good bodybuilding left before, I'd be competing with masters guys, and I'm, no offense to them, but that's just not my world. So.
Got it, man. Got it. I love it. All right. We're going to finish up here. Now, before we wrap things up, I do want to ask you a little bit just about training, because obviously that's a huge play in bodybuilding, and most people that are going to be watching, listening to this, we really enjoy and love to train. So what's kind of like your overall training philosophy currently, and how has it evolved over the years, and why have you kind of settled on the way you train now, if it has changed at all over the years, Nick?
Yeah. So twofold here. Obviously, as I've gotten older, I've realized that I can't just piss pound my body into the ground. And so I've made a huge emphasis, not only in my own training, but even in my clients, on recovery and making sure that the body is recovered enough, not only from the training aspects of things, but also life, and making sure that we're actually getting optimal recovery in order to help out with building. And also, understanding that, the body can only deal with so much of a load, allostatic load, before we kind of get a diminishing return. And that's person dependent. And so that's the reason why I track a lot of metrics when it comes to how you're performing and how you're resting and how's your sleep and how's all of that. And so, from a training standpoint, I'm all about balls to the walls, ass kicking training, as long as we can recover from it. But it's an aspect of understanding what the body can recover from. And so, total volume and paying attention to that and watching the metrics of the individual is how I create programming, and also how I dictate my own programming. So it's an aspect, like I said, right now we've got pretty low volume, but we've got 2 working sets, and then we've got maybe, let's say I've got a total of 6 lifts in a workout. I've got maybe 2 of those lifts are going to be like 2 top end sets. And then one of those lifts will be a lift that's got like a cluster set or a drop set or some sort of intensifier. And so it's an aspect of understanding that total volume is relative to recovery. And, it's what can my body recover from, but what can I also create optimal stimulus to build and break down muscle tissue at the same time. And again, that's all going to be dependent upon where you're at from a nutrition standpoint. For us, we're not in a crazy surplus, so I'm not going to recover nearly as well as if I was in more of a surplus and we could deal with a little bit more volume. So, from a philosophy standpoint, I would say the biggest difference that I have is paying attention more so to recovery, paying attention more so to like kind of warming up and getting the joints moving and all of that before going straight into my top sets. When I was younger, I would literally just walk in the gym and go after it. I can't do that anymore. So, taking the time to actually prep the body before I go into that stuff. And then, like I said, I think, again, I grew up, when I got into bodybuilding, I did a lot of John Meadows style programming. And if you've ever done Meadows programming, it's insane. Like he has a decent amount of volume in there, and lots of drop sets and supersets and the sets to death and whatever else. And, that's great and it works, but it doesn't take into individualized recovery. And that's the key is what can you fully recover from? And I think that's where most people make a mistake is they just follow a program and they're not listening to their body and they're just doing, they're training 5 or 6 days a week. And, I actually saw more results from doing it where I was doing 2 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off, and sometimes taking 2 days off, depending upon how hard I had trained and how beat up my body was. And I actually grew faster from doing that.
Very cool. All right. The last thing I want to touch on with you, because I know it's important to you. It's important for me to kind of just touch on this before we wrap it up, Nick. Fatherhood, having a family, obviously from our conversation today, that's something that's a huge focal point in your life. It's very important to you. So how kind of when you had your first child, like how did fatherhood, how has fatherhood kind of molded you, changed you, shaped you? I mean, where are you at with that? Just talk about the importance of fatherhood, family in your life, and just kind of how it's changed your perspective, so to speak.
Yeah. So, honestly, being a dad has changed me in the aspect of it's no longer about me. It's probably one of the most, seeing your son born or seeing your kid born in general is probably one of the most eye-opening experiences you'll ever have, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's no longer like it was about me. It was about us. It's no longer about us. Right. And understanding that I have, 2 boys that constantly look up to me and constantly see what I'm doing and see my actions, and knowing that everything that I'm doing is molding them as individuals. It's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of times where I'm sitting back going, am I doing the right thing? And questioning my own actions, only because of the fact that now I have 2, little images of me that are watching everything that I'm doing. And, it does make me question a lot of the actions and decisions that I make throughout my day. And is this what I want them to see? And is this what I want them to, be molded by in the future? So it changes a lot of your own selfish inhibitions, because of the fact that, everything that you do at this point in time is now directly reflected into them. And, and it's a sobering thought a lot of the time, because, you start to see a lot of the flaws that you have personally as well. And it starts to kind of self-check you in order to kind of move you in the correct direction. So, yeah, one of the biggest things I would say is it's taught me an aspect of really focusing on what truly matters, and understanding that there's a lot of stuff that goes on that doesn't really mean all that much. And, they can bring me back to baseline pretty dang quick. And one of those things where, I could have had a horrible day, but I come home and they come running up to the door saying, "Daddy," and it takes that entire thing away. And understanding that and remembering that, and knowing that, like, my long days that I'm putting in between work and between gym and all of this stuff, it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter all that much, because I've got them and I've got my family. And if all of it was to come crumbling down and none of it was there, they're the people that would be there. And they're the ones that I have to continue to remember that every action that I'm taking is for us, and not just for me.
Well said. All right. First of all, Nick, I just want to say again, thank you for coming on the podcast, man, taking some time out of your 4th of July weekend, your prep, to share your story with us. It's greatly appreciated. Before I do the outro, if you have any final thoughts, any final words, any shout outs, the platform's yours. I also would like you to just mention your gyms, what the name is. A lot of people might be flying through Omaha, just throughout their travels, and they might need a place to train. So just your Instagram, your gym's Instagram, the name of your gym, and then any shout outs, any final thoughts, any final words. The platform is yours. I'll do the outro, and that'll be a wrap.
Perfect. So my Instagram is BR Physiques. Our gyms are Iron Heaven Gym, and we've got 3 locations across Omaha. And the Instagram for that is Iron Heaven Omaha. And then as far as shout outs go, obviously to my main support, my wife and our boys, to my coach, Derek Dolgner, and then everyone that's kind of supported me and around me, between the gym family that we have, and my coaches with BR Physiques, and everybody kind of putting up with how I've been, obviously, since dieting down and kind of doing everything that we're doing. I appreciate every single person that has encouraged and or said words and or been there along the way. It means a lot, because again, like I said, bodybuilding is a very selfish endeavor, and at the end of the day, everybody else doesn't really benefit necessarily from it. So I appreciate the support and the love that is always put my way. So
awesome. And I just want to say also, Nick, good luck, man, in a few weeks at USA. So, all right.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. All of you who are tuning in to another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, listening, supporting the podcast. Really quick, as we wrap up this conversation with Nick today, please make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and also take this episode, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Nick, tag Behind the Muscle, so that we know that you listen specifically to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.